Okay, schedule stuff. Reminder, this Wednesday, just a couple days from now, kicks off Lent with Ash Wednesday. Dinners are at 6, worship is at 7. So that will be a new thing that's going on. And I hope to see you at the midweek services if possible. All right, sermon note questions. We've kind of bumped into this over the course of the last few weeks, something we've been talking about. If there is no line for us to cross, why do people still end up in hell? Good question. Do they? Or has Jesus overcome that? Hey, Ben. I don't know. I also kind of wonder, is hell what we think of? Like, what do you guys think of when you hear hell? What images come to mind? Fire, lava. What else? What? Fire. A lot of fire. Corpses. What else? Demons. Everything is red. It's like being in a what do I call it? Dark room for developing pictures. Do they even still develop pictures anymore? I don't know. Like we just look at them on our phones. When's the last time you actually looked at a picture? I don't know. I'm getting off topic. Okay. So most of the images that we have or that come to mind for us when we think of hell, all this fiery redness, all that, kind of comes from, it's actually an epic poem called Dante's Inferno that was written, I don't know, a few hundred years back. We don't really have a whole lot of descriptions of hell in the scriptures. We do have some imagery in Revelation, which is kind of weird. That does kind of talk about lakes of fire, so that's maybe where some of that comes from. But, holy cow, are we all here? I got you, Kevin. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. No, who's not here? Kai's not. Who else? Yep. Okay. All right. But there's different language that talks about the place of the dead that we hear. You guys ever heard Sheol before? Sometimes we hear that like Sheol, kind of a weird thing. Sheol is the place of the dead, like wherever dead people go, or wherever dead people are. Have you heard, perhaps, we'll get a little bit more Greek, have you heard of Hades before? Hades in Greek mythology is the place of the dead. Sheol's kind of the same thing. And in fact, in the Apostles' Creed, where we have the line where we always say that Jesus was crucified, died, and was buried, he descended into hell. Original language for that is he descended to the dead. He descended to where, and I don't even know if descended is the right word. Like, is hell down? Maybe. I mean, we always think of up and down, but direction probably doesn't really matter. So when we talk about a lot of this different stuff, I think it kind of comes from the idea of us trying to wrap our heads around that which we cannot really fully understand. So long story short, that's a good question that I can't really answer. But I do think about, I think we mentioned this last week, that there's the one passage somewhere in the New Testament where we hear that when Jesus was dead, he preached to the souls in prison. So I like to think that hell is empty except for the devil who's sitting there all pissed off. But I don't know. So, good question. Okay, why doesn't the rabbit or the bunny symbolize Easter? You guys really latched on to the Easter bunny last week. Very, very strongly. Because...
It is in the Bible. It's in a passage about you can't eat rabbits because they're unclean. So it is in the Bible like 3 times.
Well, yes, there are rabbits, but there is no connection between rabbits and the resurrection.
Well, the resurrection is in the Bible and rabbits.
You know what else is in the Bible?
Both start with R.
Also in the Bible is that we're not supposed to eat shellfish, but shrimp is delicious. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And so let's see. In all, like, you're all wearing clothes, which is a good thing. And are you all wearing just strictly like one material, like just cotton? Or do you have poly blends going on? Because that's also a no-no. So just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean that it is connected to the resurrection. Yeah, anyway. I don't really, to be honest, I don't know where the tradition of the Easter Bunny came from without doing some research. No clue. But anyway, okay. Who wants to open us with prayer today? Anyone? Good Lord. It sounds like the apocalypse up there. Come on up.
Jesus, the living Christ, help us stay with you and know that when the cross is so important, like your first disciples, we are scared by the manner of your death, turning our fear into something you can use to touch us as teach us so that we can remain by your side and speak to you and others. Help us to know that when you remain close to us, even when we run away from you. Amen.
Amen. Okay, thank you, Kennedy. All right, so last week, anybody remember what we talked about besides the Easter Bunny? At great length. Not the crucifixion, close.
Last Supper.
The Last Supper, yes. Anyone remember what Jesus and the disciples were celebrating at the Last Supper? Passover, yes. Okay, and what else did Jesus do at the Last Supper? Or what did he give us? An imposter? Not an imposter.
The bread that is the bread and wine.
Yep. And what do we call that? Communion, right. Now, imposter's not the right word. I know where you're getting at, but what did he revealed that someone was going to do what? Betray him. Yes, someone would betray him. But he wasn't an imposter. We knew it was Judas the whole time. Right? What?
Didn't we also get the Lord's Prayer from the Last Supper?
No. The Lord's Prayer is actually part of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew's Gospel. And I'm trying to think where it's at in Luke, because the Lord's Prayer shows up in Matthew and in Luke. It might still be the same setting in Luke, but it's not at the Last Supper. Okay. All right.
The disciples just all think, like they know Judas is the imposter. It's like, this is like an outsider now. Like all 11 of them are just, and then he's
Like, we hate you now.
we don't like you.
Well, so, excuse me. Do you remember? I'm trying to think if we read this last week. So when Jesus reveals this, what does Judas do?
Well, it can't be me.
First he's like, yeah, it can't be me. And Jesus is like, haha. No, there's no JK in this one. In one of the Gospels, I think it's John. As soon as Jesus reveals this, Judas just leaves.
It's like, okay.
Yeah. It's a little different. That is John. It's a little bit different in the Synoptic Gospels, the other three, because as we heard last week, Judas also gets communion, right? He receives that as well. So he doesn't leave instantly. But in John's Gospel, basically, as soon as Jesus is like, dude, he runs away and goes and gets the people who are going to arrest Jesus. Yeah. So I don't really know if the other 11 really picked up on that or not. The different accounts kind of sort of muddle the details just a little bit to know how they responded. My thought is they're still caught up in like, whoa, somebody's going to do this. It's not me, is it? Is it me? Is it you? I don't think it's me. Is it you? Is it me? I don't know. Is it you? Judas talking to Jesus. Oh, well, I don't care. Is it me? Is it you? So I don't know. But he's dead shortly after this, so it doesn't probably really matter too much. Okay. All right. Following the Last Supper, when it's over, Jesus and the 11 disciples, because who's missing? Judas, that we just established that. They leave the city and they go out across the valley. It's called the Kidron Valley, into the Garden of Gethsemane. It's fairly close to the city. It's not very far away. Actually, I have a picture here if you guys want to see it. That's from the garden, or where we think the garden is. You got to come up and look at it if you want to. It's not, I probably should have blown it up a little bit more. So what you can see in this picture, this is the Temple Mount, and this is down in the valley from where the garden is at, looking back up at the city. And then another picture. This is from the garden, or at least this is from a garden that they say is the garden. Well, what's really funny is over in the Holy Land, A lot of times one church body like the Catholic Church will say it happened here. And then other church bodies like the Orthodox Church will say, no, it happened over here. So there's at least 2 gardens of the Gethsemane. Probably more. And they fight over, no, this is the real spot. And they're like, no, this is the real spot. And Jesus is in heaven like, it wasn't there.
It's like it was neither of those.
It was neither of those. That actually happened in Galilee. They messed it up when they wrote it down. No, but anyway, so yeah, so they go out to the garden. Why do they go to the garden? To pray. Yeah. And apparently this is a spot where they commonly went to do that when they're around the city. Like, we got this really sweet garden. What do you think what do you think grew in the garden? Olives. Yeah. Do you know what kind of plant olives grow on? No, not vines. Trees. They're actually trees. And here's the really cool thing about olive trees. You can graft new branches onto olive trees very easily. You know what grafting is? Basically, you take a shoot and you can attach it into the trunk, and it will merge in and it will grow. It's a pretty common horticultural type thing. But olive trees, you can do this really, really well. So in the garden where I had that picture, there are olive trees that have been around. They have dated them back to the time of Jesus and even older than that. So I may have looked at trees that Jesus looked at. May, unless he was in a completely different location, which is possible. But why did we go on that tangent? I don't know. Anyway, olives grow on trees, yes. So that's so when we think about Jesus in the garden, don't think of it as like he's in between the rows of potatoes and they're growing strawberries and things like that. No, it was an olive grove, really. Okay, so they get to the garden. Who's there? Jesus and who? The 11 disciples. Okay, so they get to the garden, and then Jesus is like, I don't want all of you. Some of you stay here. I'm going to take 3 of you with me. What 3 disciples do you think he takes with him? Not Bartholomew. Peter's one. Not Andrew. What about Simon? Nope, same dude. Think of who were the other 2 first disciples. John and his brother Jim? Because yes, but yeah, we're going to call James Jim from here on out. James and John. So Peter, James, and John. He's like, you 3 come with me. And they go a little deeper into the garden. And he's like, you 3 pray with me. I'm going to go 10 steps over here. And they fall asleep. Smooth, guys. Real smooth. Real smooth. Okay. This is the point where Jesus is praying to God and says, I want the cup to pass from my lips. Now, what do you think Jesus is saying there? This shit is going to suck. I don't want to do it. But not my will, but yours. Sorry, I get mouthy sometimes. You guys have noticed that about me, right? Yeah, okay. Basically, he knows what's about to happen. He knows it's not going to be pleasant. And he doesn't want to go through it, and yet he is obedient. Now, following this scene of Jesus praying, who had disappeared? Judas. And where did Judas go? To the bad guys, because he himself is a bad guy, apparently. So he shows up with a crowd of the temple police and soldiers. Now, depending on which of the 4 Gospels we are reading, the size of the crowd varies. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all say that there was just a crowd of soldiers with them, and we don't really know how many. How many do you think it was? Like, they're going to arrest one dude, and and Judas has probably told them, well, he's probably got about a dozen other people with him. So how many soldiers do you think they would take? 20. I mean, yeah, they outnumber them. That should be good, right? Yeah, okay. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we don't know how many it is. It's just a crowd. However, in John's Gospel, we hear that it is a cohort. I forget what the word is. I didn't write it down. But maybe it's legion. I forget. The number is 600 soldiers. Yeah, legion I think is too big. I feel like cohort is the right. I'd have to look it up. It doesn't really matter. But if we look back through historical records, we see that this term, whatever that term is 600 soldiers to arrest one dude.
Well, maybe they thought he was going to go like all miracle crazy and like shoot powers at them or something.
All miracle crazy and shoot powers might be the greatest thing I've ever heard. That's going to end up in a sermon someday. Maybe today. Who knows? He goes, oh, what was it again?
All miracle crazy and shoots power.
All miracle crazy and shoots powers. I like that. Okay. So do you think that everything just went smoothly and they just walked up and they're like, Jesus, you're under arrest? And Jesus is like, okay, let's go.
Peter tried to rip the ear off.
Yeah. Peter cut somebody's ear off. And think about that. Like, what was he trying to do that he cut the dude's ear off? He's probably going for the head. Maybe he's a bad shot, or maybe the guy dodged, or flinched. Either way, his ear gets cut off. Now, in some of them, Jesus is like, dude, and he picks the guy's his ear up, and he heals him, which is nice of Jesus. Other times, Jesus just kind of leaves the ear laying there on the ground. Depends on which one we're reading. So there's some confrontation, and it varies from gospel to gospel. But in the end, who all gets arrested? Do they all get arrested? Or does only Jesus get arrested? Yeah, only Jesus gets arrested because they all run away. All of them. They flee in terror. Why would they run? They don't want to get arrested. Jesus has told them multiple times, guys, I'm going to get tortured. If you get arrested with me, it probably will not go well for you either. Yeah, so they pretty much all run away. Let's see. He's in prison overnight, they're doing trial stuff overnight. Like, it's a pretty long story. So this actually brings us to our story that we're going to focus on today. We've been doing a lot of background work in what happened from supper time until breakfast, essentially. Side note, do you think Jesus got breakfast?
No.
Probably not. Okay. The crucifixion, do you think this is an important story? Yes. Do you think it's important enough to be featured in all four Gospels? Yes, it is. Now, whenever something is in all four Gospels, they tend to vary, right? And usually, even if they only show up in two stories, they tend to vary. But there's a whole lot of stuff going on. But before we do, let's talk about crucifixion. What do you know about crucifixion? Jesus died. Yeah. But let's not talk Jesus specifically. Let's just talk crucifixion in general. What is it?
You have a cross and you nail your hands and feet, I think also your side. And it's really, really like the worst way.
Yeah. Side note, everyone open up to Luke 23 while we're talking. Yeah. So your hands are nailed to a crossbeam. You are lifted up. Are we out of Bibles? Do you need one, Peyton, or are you just going to share? Okay. Your feet are also nailed. Jesus did get stabbed in the side, but that didn't always happen. We'll get there. Okay. Was it a common method of execution in the Roman in Roman history? Okay, you just gave both answers. Yes and no, which is actually correct. Yes and no. Are there easier ways to kill someone?
Yes.
Are there much more expedient ways of killing someone?
Yes.
Like what?
Like strangling.
Maybe with a sword or an axe.
And I think like the crucified on the side of the road to kind of like scare you.
Ah, uh-huh.
More of like if you act like that, you'll have that.
Yeah. What, Ollie? Make sure they suffer. Okay, yes. So is crucifixion fast? No. It's slow. It's torturous. It's painful. We'll talk about why here in just a second. Where did it tend to happen? Along the side of the road so other people could see. Could see what? Them dying. Maybe them dead, but probably them dying, right?
How long do they leave them? Like a couple of weeks?
I don't know. We'll get to that. Until they starve to death? That's unlikely. But I guess it could potentially be. Okay, so yes, they nail you to the cross. Literally, nail you to the cross. Now, we tend to think and hear through the hands. It's actually would be through the wrist. Because do you think, if you put a nail right here, like what's in here? cartilage, bones, but they're like in a line, right? You guys remember this from if you've taken any anatomy? So if your weight is hanging from your hand, it's gonna rip right through. Yeah. So what's right here? Joints, bones coming together. Put the nail there, you got an anchor point. I'm going to be very flippant about this, and I shouldn't be. Like, this is brutal. This stuff is brutal. Okay? So goes through there. So you're hanging from your wrists, basically. Now, where else was there a nail? In the feet. Why? Do you remember?
I'm pretty sure it's something about like they actually like they die and like they can't sleep. And
Yes.
Like they're trying to like
Mhm.
support themselves. It's really messed up.
Okay, yes. So when you're hanging from your arms, gravity is a pump, and it puts pressure down the sides of your body, which puts pressure on your organs, which puts pressure on your lungs, which means you cannot breathe. So you suffocate. Now, why would they nail your feet? So you can stand up. Yeah. Good. Why am I smiling? This is not nice. Now, do they stretch your legs clear out far, or do they put a little bend in your knees? A little bend in your knees so that you can thrust your weight down against that nail that's anchoring your feet to push you up just far enough to take the pressure off your lungs so you can get a gasping breath. Sounds lovely, right? Yeah. And this goes on for hours and hours and hours and days. Okay. So it is a brutal, torturous, horrendous way to go. It is not fast, and it is intended as an example, like Sammy said, for anyone walking by to be like, ooh. Now, who do you think, or what type of person would be executed in this way to serve as an example? Murderers, maybe. People who tried to raise up against the Roman Empire. So sometimes people with like some political power, some political authority might do it. For instance, if King Herod, you've heard this name before, if King Herod got uppity against the Romans, he would probably get crucified. Now, did King Herod ever get uppity against the Romans? Well, actually, maybe he did, but not drastically. But so, yes, people, it's essentially considered to be an example for this is what happens if you forget your place, if you raise up against the Roman Empire. Like if you pay your taxes and keep your head down, okay. We might treat you crappy, but we'll mostly leave you alone. But if not, here's what happens to you. Okay. Now, tuck that away in the back of your minds, because we're going to talk about Jesus now. All right. All right. So Jesus is arrested in the garden. They bring him to the temple. This is still that night, where he is questioned and accused by the chief priests. Now, there's somebody trailing along behind. You know who? Who? Peter. Yes, Peter is trailing along behind. Peter gets recognized. And they're like, hey, aren't you one of the disciples? And what's he say? No. No. A little time passes. Wait, weren't you with him? Aren't you his friend? What's he say? No. Oh, heck no. Somebody else. And I'm pretty sure it's you. And he's like, no. We talked about this last week. Jesus predicted this, didn't he? Yeah. Hey, Peter, you're going to screw up 3 times. And then the rooster's going to crow, which happens. Not sure why we care about the rooster, kind of like the rabbit, right? Roosters are cute, aren't they? Do we want to bring a rooster into the... You can make that happen.
Rabbits are cute, but we can settle for a rooster.
Yeah. Okay. Luke 23, 1 through 5. Everybody got Luke 23? All right. Kennedy, you want to read 1 through 5 for us?
Then the whole assembly rose and led him off the... Is it Pilate?
Pilate, yep.
Yeah. And they began to accuse him, saying, found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Christ, the king. So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of Jews?" "Yes, it is who you say," Jesus replied. Then the Pilate announced, and the chief priests in the crowd, "I find no basis of a charge against this man." But they insisted, "He stirs up the people all over Judah, and by his teaching he started in Galilee and has come all the way here." On his hearing
That's good. That's good. Stop there. Okay. So the assembly, this is like the religious council, they haul Jesus off to who? Pilate. Who's Pilate?
The judge.
He's not a judge. What's his role? You remember? He's the big Roman cheese. Big Roman cheese? Big cheese Roman? I don't know. However, he's the governor. So he's like the most important Roman or the one with the most authority. Okay. Now, the religious bigwigs want Jesus dead, but they don't have the authority to execute him themselves. So what do they say about Jesus? What do they accuse him of? Teaching false stuff like what?
Like he's God. And
Did they say that here? Because would Pilate care? Like he thinks he's God? Okay, I don't care. What do they accuse him of?
He thinks that he says he's a king. And
Says he's a king.
he shouldn't pay taxes.
Shouldn't pay
He
taxes.
stirs up the people with his religious beliefs.
Stirs up the people against who? Against Caesar. Okay, so like standing up against the Romans, right? You think they do this intentionally? Because they know what it's going to take to get him killed. Right, okay. So does Pilate does he buy it? Does Pilate buy it? Not really. He's like, "You king?" He's like, "Eh." I was like, whatever. Like, literally, he's kind of like, this seems like kind of crappy. Like, I don't really buy this. Okay. Do the people give up? No. They kind of keep pushing, right? How many of you have little siblings? Several of you do. Some of you were little siblings at one point. You ever seen an 8-year-old trying to get something from their parents? What do? Yeah.
They don't give up.
They don't give up, do they? They just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Like, can I have this? No. But can I have this? No. But can I have this? No. Can I have this? Fine. That kind of sound like what these guys are doing? Yeah, I think so too. Okay, let's continue. 6 and 7. Peyton, you want to grab that?
On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at the time.
Okay. Who's Herod?
the dude that wanted to kill him.
A dude who wanted to kill him since birth. No, that was his dad. Yeah. But this is Herod the Great's son, who is, sometimes we hear he's called a king. Sometimes we hear he's called a tetrarch, which is a fancy way of saying he's one of 4 rulers of the area. So he's important, but he's still subservient to Rome. Okay? And yeah. So, all right. 8 through 12. Ainsley, why don't you grab that?
When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform some miracle. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teacher of the law were standing there, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this, they had been enemies.
Okay. Awesome. So why would Herod be in Jerusalem? Why do you think? Think of his nationality or his culture. What? He's Jewish. So why would he be in Jerusalem? What's going on in Jerusalem? Do you remember? Passover. Yeah. So that's why Herod is there. So Herod had hoped to meet Jesus, and now he has the opportunity. Seemingly, how does it go? Is it a very wonderful conversation? Or is he like, what's going on? I want to ask you a bunch of stuff and you're just not going to answer me. You're just going to stand there. Yes. Yeah. So Jesus kind of gets ridiculed. Essentially, nothing really happens. So Herod sends Jesus back to Pilate when he can't really do anything. So does Pilate seem like he really wants to do anything with Jesus? No. And does Herod seem like he really wants to do anything with Jesus? No. No. So, hey, Herod and Pilate have found common ground. Look at that. Jesus, even in the midst of his betrayal and arrest and everything, is creating relationship. Way to go, Jesus. All right. 13 to 25. That's a little bit longer. I'll read that. Pilate then called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, You brought me this man as one who is perverting the people, and here I have examined him in your presence, and have found this man not guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither is Herod, for he sent him back to us. Indeed, he has done nothing to deserve death. Does Herod want to do it? Not Herod, excuse me. Does Pilate want to do anything here? No. Okay. I will therefore have him flogged and release him. He's innocent. Let's whip him. Ouch. Yeah. Okay. Continuing on at 18. Then they all shouted together, Away with this fellow, release Barabbas for him. This is a man who had been put in prison for insurrection that had taken place in the city and for murder. Now Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again, but they kept shouting, Crucify him, crucify him. A third time he said to him, What evil has he done? I have found in him no ground for the sentence of death. I will therefore have him flogged and then release him. But they kept urgently demanding with a loud shout that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate gave his verdict that their demand should be granted. He released the man that they asked for, the one who had been put in prison for insurrection and murder, and he handed Jesus over as they wished. Okay, so we have the 8-year-old still pushing, right? He's bad. We don't like him. Kill him, kill him, kill him, kill him, kill him. Isn't that what kind of comes to mind? Now that will forever be what comes to mind for you. Yes. Pilate's like, no. Yeah. Okay, now, we hear about this Barabbas guy. Who's Barabbas? He's a murderer and what? What else? An insurrection. You know what insurrection is? Like rising up against the government. So Barabbas would probably die how? Crucifixion. What? Why would he get crucified? Why didn't he? Because we don't hear about it in Luke, but we hear about it in some of the other ones. There is a tradition during the festival that the Romans release a prisoner to the people. It's basically a popularity contest. And also, ironically, Barabbas' first name, take a guess what it is. Not Marcus. Maybe you've heard about another guy with the same name that we're also talking about. Nope. Close. Jesus. Jesus Barabbas. Because Jesus is a very common name. So basically, Pilate's like, do you want Jesus or do you want Jesus, Bruce? I don't know if he said it like that. But he's trying to release Jesus. They ask for Barabbas to be released. So finally, after pushing and pushing and pushing, Jesus says, fine, I'll give you what you want. He releases Barabbas, and Jesus is condemned. Now, why would Pilate relent? Why would Pilate give in when he clearly knows, like, this guy, there's no reason to kill him?
He did it. He would be killed himself.
Why?
Because people didn't like his ways, and they would try to kill him because he's not.
Who would?
People.
Who? Like what people? What type of people?
Probably the people from Romans.
The Romans? Yes. Okay, here's the thing. He's a Roman governor. Palestine, Holy Land, Israel, whatever you want to call it, is a backwater part of the Roman Empire. Do you think any of the bigwigs from Rome want to be there? No. So why would he maybe be there? Why would he be assigned there? Think politically. Where do you stick people who you don't really like? You send them off, right? So what do you think that says about Pilate's reputation with the Romans? Not great. Not real great. Okay, now imagine that there's a big religious festival in your area and a riot happens under your watch. How's that going to look for you? Terrible. It's going to not look good. And maybe you've already had 2 strikes against you. How's that going to, what are we going to do with that guy who can't maintain order? We're either going to exile him or maybe we'll just kill him. Yeah. So, does Pilate want a riot? No, he wants to keep the peace. So when all the religious bigwigs who have the capability of stirring up the crowds, all the things that they're saying Jesus is doing, if they're starting to get uppity, maybe we should just kind of relent. Right? So like that parent who's just so sick of hearing the 8-year-old push and push and push that they just give in. That's kind of what happens. All right. Okay, so we're going to skip ahead now to verse 32. Essentially, Jesus has been condemned, and how does he get to the place where he's going to be crucified? Do you know? They make him walk and carry what? He has to carry his own cross. Isn't that great? We're going to execute you. You have to carry the means of your own execution. Ha! Have fun with that. Yeah. So Jesus has to carry his own cross. During this part that we're skipping, there's another guy. His name is Simon of Cyrene, not Peter, different Simon, who helps him carry the cross. They basically grab him out of the crowd. They're like, hey, he's falling down. You help him. He's like, I don't want to. And they're like, no, do it anyway. And Jesus sees a bunch of people crying for him. He's like, it's cool. Don't worry about it. But it's not don't worry about it. He says, don't cry for me. So that's what we're skipping over. 32 to 43. Let's continue. I'll read it. 2 others who were also criminals were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that's called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them. They do not know what they're doing. Jesus is a really nice guy, isn't he? Like, yeah, they're killing me. Yeah, they don't know what they're doing. They cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by watching, but the leaders scoffed, saying, he saved others, let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one. Let's stop right there. Why would they say that? He's done so many miracles. He's even raised people from the dead before, right? So if you're who you say you are, you can save yourself. You think Jesus could? Yeah, I think so too. But does he? No. Okay, let's continue. We are now at verse 36. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, this is the king of the Jews. One of the criminals who was hanged there kept deriding him and saying, are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, do you not fear God, because we are under the same sentence of condemnation. Indeed, we have been condemned justly. We are getting what we deserve for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he replied, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Okay, so now we got the actual crucifixion. Is Jesus by himself? No, there's 2 other guys. How do they react to him? One's like a jerk, and the other's like, dude, shut up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. This is another point where different gospels have different things. And some of them, it's both of them that are giving Jesus a hard time. In this one, we hear that they have different reactions. Now, how does Jesus react?
He says to them that you will be with me in kingdom.
What does he say? Paradise. Okay, what does that sound like? AKA Hawaii. Today you will be with me in Hawaii. Don't know how we're going to get there. It's halfway around the world, but it's going to be awesome. No, you're going to be with me in paradise. What does that sound like? Heaven. Okay, sounds like heaven. When is it going to happen? Today. All right. Remember when we talked about that whole purgatory thing? You guys remember purgatory? Yeah. 7th graders, do you remember purgatory? Have we talked about purgatory? Okay, that was last year. Purgatory, this is a Catholic belief that after you die, before you get to go to heaven, you essentially have to wait in the heavenly waiting room. For lack of a better description, that's the best I can do. Because you have to wait basically for your sins to wear off. So you have to wait. Now, 8th graders. How could you get your family members out of purgatory? You could pay the Pope and buy them out of there. I know, huge eye roll. 7th graders, we'll talk about this next year. But does Jesus say, after the heavenly waiting room, you'll be with me in paradise? No, what does he say? Today. Okay, so what do we think about purgatory? It doesn't hold water, right? Okay, cool. So this whole thing started the night before, and they've been at it since before daybreak. We hear in one of the other accounts that Jesus is actually crucified, like literally nailed and hung up, at the 3rd hour. Anybody know what time the 3rd hour is? Not 3 o'clock. The day starts at 6. So what time is the 3rd hour? 9 a.m. All right? Okay. Did we read that? Oh, no, we're supposed to read farther. Okay, picking up at 44. It's now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, while the sun's light failed and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I have commended my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. When the centurion, who's one of the soldiers, when the centurion saw that what had taken place, he praised God and said, certainly this man was innocent. Okay, what time is it now? 12. It's noon, middle of the day. All right, this whole deal, all of this torturous stuff started the night before. Do you think Jesus got any sleep overnight? Probably not. He was literally nailed to a piece of wood at 9 a.m., and it's now noon. Okay? So how long has he been hanging there? He's been hanging there for 3 hours. Okay, now, think back to what we talked about before with how crucifixion actually kills you. How does it kill you? Suffocation, right. Okay. He's been hanging there for 3 hours, and then he dies. Right? Did we just read that he died? Yeah, he breathed his last. Okay. Do you think that's actually a speedy crucifixion? Yes. When it can last for literally days, 3 hours, pretty short. Yep.
If you're in so much pain, wouldn't you just want to kill yourself and just not breathe?
Yes, you probably would, but the human desire for survival is pretty strong, isn't it? Anybody ever had a close call? Like a real close call? Not like my dad's mad at me and he might kill me, but like, okay. Have I told you guys this before? I almost drowned about 16 years ago. I was swimming. I was a doorknob and I tried to swim out to a buoy in a lake when it was really rough, and I got in trouble. And it is utterly terrifying. And so I know all about survival instinct. You will do whatever you can to stay alive. So would you want to die? Probably. But your body's going to take over. I don't know. It's a weird deal. It's weird to think about, isn't it? And it's maybe morbid to think about. But yeah, I mean, it's torturous. It's horrible. I think people would probably eventually welcome death, but maybe their bodies don't let them do it. I don't know. And I hope I never get firsthand experience. I really don't. Yeah. Okay. We actually don't hear about it in Luke. But in one of the other accounts, or a couple of the other accounts, we hear that the soldiers come around and break the legs of the 2 criminals, the other 2. Not Jesus, but the other 2. Why would they do that? Ultimately, yes. But what does that accomplish? Like if your legs are broken, what can you no longer do? You can't push yourself up, right? Okay, so breaking the legs of the 2 criminals would actually be a mercy because it lets them die. This does not compute, but it's actually a mercy. Yeah, so what are we going to do? We're going to take a sledgehammer and break your legs. Why? Because we feel bad for you. Yeah. Yes. Okay, verse 48. When all the crowds who had gathered there for the spectacle saw what had taken place, they returned home beating their breasts. But all of his acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. Now there was a good and righteous man named Joseph, who, though a member of the religious council, had not agreed to their plan and action. He came from the Jewish town of Arimathea, and he was waiting expectantly for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down, wrapped it in a linen cloth, and laid it in a rock-hewn tomb where no one had ever been laid. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed, and they saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath, they rested according to the commandment. All right, so there is a crowd of people following along. How do they respond to this whole thing? Yeah. Now, why would you do that? What's that a sign of? Extreme sadness. Yeah. Where do most of the people go? They go home. Not really sure why they go home, but that's what they do. We hear there's one dude. Who's this one dude? Joseph of Arimathea. Now, he's a member of the council, a.k.a. he's part of the group of people that did this to Jesus. But did he want to? No. He's waiting expectantly for the kingdom of God. What does that sound like? He's not so much waiting to die. Who has he probably listened to at one point or another? Jesus, yes. Do you think he's a fan? Yeah, seemingly. So what does he want to do? Not so much save him, but what does he do? No, like literally, what does he do? He gets his body. He asks Pilate for permission to get his body, takes him, wraps him up, puts him in his own tomb. Okay? Who else sees it? Who else is a witness to all this? More generically, this group of women. And I say that because every gospel lists the group differently. But all of these women who have been following Jesus around, they hang out. Are the disciples still here? Well, they're long since gone. But the women stay. They watch it all happen. They see where he is laid. That will be important next week. Okay? Now, who else have we heard about that talked right when Jesus died? We got to back up a couple of verses. The centurion. Okay, the centurion is a Roman officer. All right? Now, he says this guy's innocent. Does he risk condemnation for saying that? Like, the governor condemned this guy to death. I'm going to say he's innocent publicly. What could happen to that guy? He could be condemned. What could potentially happen to Joseph of Arimathea? Like, when he publicly supports Jesus. Like, they could turn on him too. Yeah, so all of these people could be the next ones to get thrown under the bus. But it seems that Jesus somehow grants the gift of faith to these people to make public pronunciation. Okay. What do we know the women are going to do on Sunday morning? Yeah, okay. Yeah. They're going to go to the tomb and bring along their spices that we hear that they're preparing. Why would they not just go instantly? Well, they've got them prepared, apparently. We hear that. But think about when it is. When is it? It's Friday at sundown. What happens Friday at sundown? What starts? The Sabbath, yes. So can they go do anything? No. Now, would they go at night anyway? Because they're going to go into a cave. What do we know about caves and light? There's not much. So would you go into a cave at night? You would? Okay, probably not. So they're not going to go in there at night because they can't see to do anything. So in theory, when would be the first opportunity for them to do anything? Well, in theory, Saturday morning, right? But that's the Sabbath, where they can't do any work. So that's why they got to wait till Sunday. Okay? All right. Good questions. What time we got? We got a couple minutes yet. Prior to today, When you think about crucifixion, what do you think about?
Jesus.
Jesus? Cross. Let's talk about the cross. Is the cross a symbol? What do we think of when we think of a cross? The symbol of the cross. Like, what do we think of? Jesus, God, a positive thing? Like, I wear a cross in worship every week, don't I? You guys ever seen, have you looked close enough to know what's on the cross that I wear? It's Jesus hanging. Yeah. If you want to look at it when we go upstairs, I'll show it to you. But we tend to have actually a positive reaction to a cross. How do you think 2,000 years ago they would have responded? Not so great, right? It's a literal symbol of torturous, murderous control. Probably not. Yes. It would be the equivalent of wearing an electric chair. Yeah. Why would Jesus ask God to forgive the people who are killing him?
They haven't listened to him. I don't think they listened to what he was preaching.
Do you remember what he says? Forgive them for what?
Because they don't know what they're doing.
They don't know what they're doing. Okay. What does it say about Jesus that he forgives the people who are literally killing him? Like, what do you think that says about the depths of God's grace?
It goes to like a very high extent.
Like an ultimate extent, right? Yeah, I think so too. Why do you think Jesus made the promise to the criminal that he made? Like, he could have just ignored him.
Because the criminal was like, he's Jesus, he's innocent.
You remember what the guy asks Jesus? Does he ask to be saved? No, he does not. What does he ask? The other guy does. But what is the good criminal? What does he ask? Remember me when you come into your kingdom. Like, I am condemned and I am dying and I deserve it. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. Like, think on me. And Jesus says, you know what? I'm going to take it one step farther. You're going to be with me. So, what is Jesus accomplishing through his death and then his resurrection? What do you think? Forgiveness of sins. Yeah. Now, we don't know the how, right? We don't understand that. And we don't. And if anybody tells you they know how it works, they're lying to you because they don't know. But somehow, God is overcoming the power of death, making forgiveness and grace possible. But boy, imagine the cost. Like, God had to literally die to pull this off. Wow. And willingly did it. Strange? Eye-opening? Humbling? Good news?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd be like, oh, those guys are claiming condemn them.
Yeah. Does it sound like good news? When we think about this and we really think about it, does this sound like good news? Or does this sound like, holy crap, that's brutal?
It's like good news for us, but it's not good for
It's not good for Jesus, is it?
It's like good news disguised as bad because you really have to look at it for a while before you figure out why it's good news.
Uh-huh.
I think the only reason why it's good is because of the story next week.
Uh-huh.
Because
If we stopped here, if the story stopped here,
we've been so crap.
it'd be a really sad story. Like, oh, Jesus, he was nice. He did cool stuff, but they killed him. Now, think about it from the opposition standpoint. If you want to silence somebody, what's the best way to do it? What's the ultimate way of doing it? Kill him. You think that's why the council wants him dead? Yeah, okay. Does it work? Yes and no. I mean, does it work? Yeah, Jesus dies.
You silence Jesus, but you don't silence
What are we talking about next week? Easter, the resurrection. 3 days later, God says, guess what? Death doesn't win. Okay? To be continued. This is admittedly a troublesome lesson today. And I know I joke around a lot and I kind of make light of things, but when it comes to crucifixion, I cannot stress how brutal It is. It's whatever you're imagining, it's worse. So it is. Thanks for honest conversation, because I know that this isn't the easiest thing to talk about. Who wants to pray us out of here today? Kennedy's off the hook. Who do I want to pick on? I'm going to pick on, I don't even remember who I picked on. I'm going to pick on Sam. Sam, you want to pray us out?
Dear God, thank you for bringing us together to learn about you, and thank you for sending your son to die and forgive all of us. Amen.
Amen. All right.